We haven't done an intro because Sin's not here again.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So why don't you introduce yourself to start with?
All right. So, hi everyone. I'm Altair. I have been a Bloodborne fan for about 7 years, in which I have done all sorts of things with this game. I am a Tomb Prospector, so I really like chalice dungeons and I like to delve in them and explore them. I have written Reddit guides of several types. Most of all, I have done a long level 4 run that I partially documented on my YouTube channel.
Yeah, and people might know you from this channel because we've streamed together a few times.
That's right. I've been a guest here several times for Return to Yarnum. I am here as a guest today. I'm honored. I proposed making an episode about blood gems, which is not what Sinclair lore usually covers.
Sin refuses to upgrade her weapons or use blood gems.
I see. Well, I don't blame her, and I get it.
Hi, Sin here. I couldn't make it to the podcast, but Sophie asked me to tell her my favorite part of the blood gem system in a note. My favorite part of the blood gem system is that I don't use it because I rely entirely on skills. Thanks, and back to the podcast.
So we'll start with within the story of the game, what blood gems are quickly.
Sure. So, if you look at the item description, they say something really interesting. They say that blood gems are especially rare bloodstones that grow on cold blood. That's really interesting because it implies that blood crystallizes or hardens or something like that and forms blood gems that you can put in your weapons.
Yeah, I think that's what's happening, and something that we'll get into when we talk about the drops is that different enemies drop different blood gems that are sort of thematic to who they are. So the idea is if your essence, your blood is a certain way, you produce a certain kind of blood gem.
Right. The other description that we found and we thought was relevant was that when gems are cursed, they have these spots over them. And that's pretty much all we know.
Yeah, that's pretty much the story of blood gems.
Yes, there isn't all the descriptions that they have other than these are all, these are tempering are physical. So they are one of the few instances in Bloodborne where the descriptions are really down to earth and actually do explain to you how things work, even though they're really brief.
So now that we've explained what blood gems are within the world of Bloodborne, I think we'll go on to what the descriptions and stuff actually mean in terms of game mechanics, like you were saying, because they can be a little confusing, they throw a lot of numbers at you.
They do.
So we'll start with, in mechanical terms, what a blood gem is.
Yes. So, very mechanically, the upgrade materials for the weapons in Bloodborne are all the same. They're all bloodstone shards compared to the older Souls games. There are no different upgrade substances for different upgrade paths. It's nothing like that. You don't find different types of titanite or anything similar to the way it was before. A blood gem is an item that you can put into your weapons to both boost their damage and changes the damage type of the weapon, or both.
So when we pick up a blood gem, we get certain information about it. So firstly, we get the rating of the blood gem.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about the rating of the blood gem is that there really doesn't seem to be any consistency. Roughly speaking, a higher level is better.
Yes, roughly speaking.
Roughly speaking, because sometimes you will get blood gems that like have a higher rating than another blood gem, but the actual effects will be worse.
That's true, and it especially happens with cursed blood gems because curses always enhance a gem's attack ratio. But if you get an uncursed abyssal gem, for example, it will have a 20 rating, even though it is garbage compared to its cursed counterpart. So it means that according to the game logic, it is a very rare gem and powerful, but they didn't keep in mind certain differences, like the curses, for example.
And it's going to have one of 5 shapes.
Gems can be radial, triangular, and waning. These are the more common shapes. And then there's 2 other shapes. There's circular, and circular is a very rare type that usually is found in blood tinged gems. It is native to blood tinged gems. And then there's droplets, and droplets are interesting because they fit any weapon imprint, so any shape on a weapon, but they are slightly weaker than the counterparts that have a shape. They are very useful for a temporary solution before you farm the best gems.
All the gems will have one primary effect, at least.
Correct. They can have up to 3 different effects. They always have one primary, so it is the main effect of the gem. They can have 1 or 2 secondary effects, so very minor effects that are a boost. And if the gem is cursed, they will not have a second secondary. They will instead have a curse out of 6 different ones.
Something we haven't covered yet is just all the weird like names and types of blood gem that you can find. So you'll find ones that are called like Fine Strike or Poorman or Fool or something and not quite understand what that is. So do you want to just go down like a list of all the different kinds of blood gem names and what they mean?
Yes, for sure. There are arcane gems, fire gems, bolt gems, and blood tinged gems. Those are named the same way as their stat or their damage type. And then there are a lot of others that have complicated names that you have to kind of learn when you're farming. Obviously, the most widely used is tempering, which is physical damage. Adept gems boost thrust or blunt attack types, which some weapons have in their moveset. Nourishing gems boost all attack types, and they're used, like we said, in split damage weapons. Heavy gems are strength scaling gems, whereas cold is arcane scaling. There are also 2 other types of scaling gems. They are sharp and warm, and they're respectively for skill scaling and blood tinge scaling. However, they are basically useless because they do not exist in abyssal format. And the reason for that probably is that skill and blood tinge are already extremely strong in game, and so they took them off probably so that you wouldn't be excessively overpowered. Other kinds of gems are Kin Hunter and Beast Hunter, and they respectively boost attack against kin or against beast enemies. Then we have Murky and Dirty. These are the poison gems. Murky is for slow poison and Dirty is for rapid poison. I don't think they're much used. However, I am a big fan of Dirty gems because I use them a lot in my low level runs, and they are very useful in that case. Then we have Fine Strike, and Fine Strike is an effect that boosts your counter hits on open enemies, and it means enemies that are in the process of attacking you.
Similar to the Leo ring in Dark Souls.
That's right. Then we have Radiant Gems, reduce stamina costs. We have Striking Gems, which improve your charge attacks. Pulsing gems recover your HP. Lethal gems boost your rally potential. Full and Poorman boost respectively physical attack at full HP and physical attack near death. And then there's another type that we haven't mentioned yet, and it's the dense blood gems.
I have some dense blood gems. So dense blood gems are interesting in that they don't kind of exist in the game anymore. You can find them if you have a physical copy of 1.0 when you install it and don't patch. And what dense gems do is they increase your durability of the weapon. The problem is that they also really don't exist in 1.0. They never show up as a primary effect, they only show up as a secondary effect. But they show up on glitched gems that don't have a primary effect. So you'll find a gem and it'll be called a dense gem and it will just have a really, really negligible durability boost and nothing else.
Very useful.
And you can farm those from one enemy in the game. If you're on 1.0 and you're unpatched and you go offline all the way down to Tomb Hill and you farm the Lost Child of Antiquity down there, you have a very, very, very low chance of getting a dense blood gem. So the main place you would look for blood gems would be the Chalice dungeons, but they're also available in the base game, just above ground in Yharnam. So we'll start by covering those ones, even though they're a lot worse.
Yes. The blood gems in the base game are significantly worse than the Chalice counterpart, but they will do, let's say, if you do not want to delve into the dungeons. They will still do. They're fine.
What we want to start with is there's 3 completely unique blood gems
Yes.
that have special names and special descriptions, and they're found in 3 significant locations. So the first one we have is the red blood gem that you get from Viola's Pendant.
It is a droplet gem, so it fits all the slots. As primary effect, it boosts your physical attack, and the secondary is boosts your rally potential.
Then there's the gold blood gem that you get from Amelia's Pendant.
Yes, this is a radial gem, and it has an attack versus beast up effect, which we call Beast Hunter in other gems.
It specifically calls out that the reason it's that is because it's like a treasure of the Healing Church. And if beasts are coming for you, you have access to this Beast Hunter gem.
Correct.
Yeah, which is odd because it's not actually very good.
Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder what kind of level the upgraded weapons of the church were at.
Then we also have finally the Dolls gem, which is called the Tear Blood gem.
Yes.
And what it does is it just gives you a very, very small HP regen.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in terms of story significance, is it's meant to represent, like, that's what the creator of the doll sort of wanted the doll to be. So, like, the essence of the doll forms this gem that also sort of protects you.
Right.
So, other than those 3, there are quite a few preset ones, but none of them are really very good.
No, they aren't.
But there are some where the kind of gem they are in the place you find them, it sort of seems like it's meant to be significant. So, like, an obvious one is under Yosefka's clinic, where they're dumping all the bodies that they're experimenting on. You find, like, arcane gems and dirty gems, because the idea is, like, it's all this sort of weird mysticism, but also the corrupted blood of the church sort of mingling together. So the bodies are producing those kinds of gems. You also find some arcane ones where there's a whole lot of like corpses and celestials. The idea is like it's the arcane energy of the celestials is sort of crystallizing in these bodies. There's a pretty good blood tinge one in Canehurst because Canehurst is where all the vile bloods are that have their like very pure blood and love using firearms and chikages and things. And then the strangest one is in the fishing hamlet, you find a kin hunter gem which does bonus damage against kin. And you can sort of assume like that was probably someone from the Healing Church who was trying to use that gem to kill the things in the hamlet, except nothing in the hamlet actually counts as kin.
Nothing is. It's curious because, well, from the aspect that they have, you would imagine that they're already kin of the cosmos.
You would assume, yeah. So, one other thing with reference to the fishing hamlet and blood gems that people have brought up is that Orphan of Cause's like placenta weapon thing, it has those sort of like weird cysts growing on it, and they look a lot like the way they describe cursed gems as having these strange things growing on them.
I always thought that not only the placenta, but also the sun, the sun, had the shape of a waning blood gem. And I never heard this mentioned because, of course, it has the shape of the corrupted blood drunk eye. But I always thought it was kind of similar.
Well, no, I think like one of the things Bloodborne does and why we're still able to keep talking about it is like all the things in the game kind of connect to everything else in the game. So like it's the eye, but it's also like the gem, and the placenta is obviously a placenta, but it's also like it's using the same imagery as the cursed gems do. So it's like linking the idea of like the curse with the Orphan of Cause, who is itself like described as being like the curse that has to be broken. And so, aside from the preset gems that you find in the base game enemies will drop gems as well. I'm not going to list all of them, but there's some kind of interesting ones. So, the main one that you and I have talked about is Winter Lanterns.
That's true. Winter lanterns are special because they drop droplet gems that are already cursed, even though they are not in a dungeon. And so those are, because they're in Mergo's Loft, they're kind of your end game gems. And they are in the Hamlet too.
Yeah, and the thing about Winter Lanterns is that we'll get to this when we talk about like the Chalice dungeons, which is the main place you would farm them normally, is that Winter Lanterns don't appear in the Chalice dungeons. And because they don't appear in the Chalice dungeons, but they're like a source of droplet gems, they're the one time you might want to farm gems outside of the Chalice dungeons.
Yes. And also, I'm not surprised that they put them right where the orphan is. Because if you have never delved into the dungeons, you may need the stronger gems for that purpose.
So outside of the Winter Lanterns being like the main drop you'd be interested in, if you don't want to do the chalices, you can get very very low level cursed gems from the Mad Ones in Hemwick. You can get arcane tempering Poorman and Fool gems from the Celestials, so you get some like interesting effects there. If you want slow poison, you can get slow poison ones from the Snakes in Forbidden Woods. If you want rapid poison, you can farm those from the Murgo attendants in Murgo's Loft. If you want blood tinged gems, you can farm them from the Blood Lickers in Canehurst, and if you want Beast Hunter and Kin Hunter gems, you can farm those from the Cramped Caskets in Yahuggle. So now we're going to go into the Chalice dungeons themselves because those are the thing you would focus on if you did want to like really play around with blood gems, because it doesn't only contain the blood gems, it also contains the different weapon imprint variants that let you really really customize the kind of gems you can use.
When you want to optimize your build and optimize your character, that's where the chalices and all they contain come into play. And that is specifically, as you said, the blood gems and the shapes of the weapon imprints.
Do you want to quickly talk about the lost and uncanny weapon imprints in case people don't know about them?
So, every weapon that you find in the game has two other versions that are called uncanny and lost. And the difference from the base weapon that these variants have are the shapes of the imprints that they can receive for blood gems. Uncanny usually has two radial gems plus the opposite of the original weapon, speaking in terms of triangle and waning. So, the saw cleaver, for example, the basic version has two radial imprints and one waning imprint. The uncanny version of it has two radial imprints and one triangular imprint. Whereas the lost weapons, they have all the three main imprints. So they have one radial, one triangular, and one waning. Unless you're a special weapon like the Chikage or the Bowblade, in that case, they have a circular slot so that you can put in blood tinged gems. So you pick the weapon imprints you want depending on the gems you need because they don't come in the same in all the shapes. They come in specific shapes like we will see now.
So now that we know how blood gems work and we know that we can kind of like pick the sort of weapon loadout we want by using lost and uncanny variants, let's talk about how we actually get the gems from the chalices, because this is the complicated part.
It is the complicated part, indeed. And as an introduction, I would like to say that the gem system is definitely one of the parts of Bloodborne where you most see the imperfection in the sense of not completed, because it is extremely complicated. It is repetitive in certain ways. There are some gems that are completely useless. The main thing you want to know is that the various chalice types have different native effects and native shapes. What am I talking about? So, if you go farm gems in Thumaru, for example, they will drop in radial shape and mostly tempering, which is physical attack. So, that is what is native to Thumaru. If you go into Lauren, they will drop in waning shape, and they will drop not only physical but also with fire and bolt attack and slow and rapid poison. If you go into East, they will drop in triangular shape and they will have all these effects plus arcane. Gem drops are also tied to the enemy that drops them. So, what you want to know is that when you're looking for a specific kind of gem, you want to go to farm it from a specific mob or a specific boss. The other thing to know is that the depth of the chalice determines how strong the gem is. So, in most cases, I can't think of an exception at the moment. In most cases, what you're going to do is going to farm gems in depth 5 chalices, the maximum depth.
So the best place to farm for gems in the chalices is depth 5 cursed and fetid, but it doesn't need to be rotted. So just depth 5 fetid cursed dungeons.
That's right. Rotted is a right that only adds a certain types of enemies, but they're not relevant for blood gem farming, so it just makes your cruise through the dungeon harder. So you don't need the rotted curse. We know this thanks to the Tomb Prospectors. So bosses drop a gem 100% of the time. They will always drop one. So when we're talking about item discovery, the usual Soulsborne stat, in that case, item discovery does not matter.
Yeah, the only thing that the discovery will affect if it's a boss is if the boss drops something other than a gem. So, like if it's a boss that can drop bloodstones or blood rocks or something, the discovery will impact whether they drop that, because that's not a 100% drop. But the
Yes,
gems are always 100%, so that doesn't have any effect.
that's right. On the other hand, if you're farming a mob, you will need discovery because gems are only one of the things on their drop table.
Yeah, and there's a hidden mechanic that the game like does not tell you about, and we didn't know about until a couple of years ago, so about 5 or 6 years after the game came out. Which is that if you are in a cursed dungeon, which you would be if you were looking for blood gems, and you equip anything that raises your item discovery, so that can be any of the eye runes or it can just be the milkweed rune, that has a hidden effect of boosting your item discovery by 1000. So if you go farming mobs with milkweed equipped in a cursed dungeon, you will get drops from pretty much every mob.
So, this is the basics of what you want to know. I talked about how chalices have native shapes and native effects. There is something else to know about that. Sometimes you get gem drops that don't follow the rules. So you're in Thumaru farming for radial gems, you will get a waning or a triangular. Or you're in Thumaru farming for tempering gems, and all of a sudden you will get an arcane gem. These gems are called out of shape or out of effect, depending on what is deviating from the norm. The chance for that to happen is about 2%. The reason why this is useful is that certain gem setups that are perfect and absolutely min-maxed demand for gems to be out of shape.
Yeah, so an example of that would be like if you wanted, say, a pure like arcane weapon, you would normally get arcane weapon. You would get you would get the arcane gems in East, but because East drops natively triangular, you might end up having to farm, say, like Thumaru or Lauren to try to get an arcane gem in that imprint. Or alternatively, like you could farm East and then you would sometimes get an out of shape one where the arcane gem would drop, but it would be radial.
Yes, that's a good example. The prime example of this, I would say, are blood-tinged gems, because blood-tinged gems only drop normally in circular shape, and obviously blood-tinged weapons only have one circular slot. So many people, including me, have done this farm that is grueling, where you farm a specific mob that drops blood-tinged gems. You farm them for hours and hours until they drop radial gems. And so you will have a Shikage, for example, that only has blood-tinged gems, and it is quite powerful. And it took me about 100 hours of in-game time, spread across 3 months. I didn't regret it, but I definitely wouldn't do it again.
So that actually leads us into the thing I want to talk about last, which is just kinds of farming runs you would do to get certain optimal setups.
Yes. And I wanted to add as a disclaimer that these setups that I'm going to talk about are no longer the ideal ones, just because the Tomb Prospectors have delved into editing the dungeons so that certain gems are easier to obtain in certain shapes or with certain effects. So we are not talking about the edited dungeons here. The setups I'm talking about are the original ones and are valid for offline farmers as well. They're still current for offline. These gems that I'm going to mention are all found in Depth 5 Fetid Cursed Root Chalices. So you have to be ready to delve in Depth 5 Fetid and Cursed Root Chalices to find the very best ones. The setup for skill is very easy, because all you really need are tempering gems. You don't need anything else. So what you want in an average skill weapon is 2 radial tempering gems from the Merciless Watcher boss in Tumeru Depth 5. And then you want 1 triangular gem, always from the Merciless Watcher boss, but this time in Easts, because they drop triangular. Let's move on to strength. What you want to do with strength is you want a heavy abyssal gem, which is a scaling gem for strength. And where do you get that? You get it in Thumeru Depth 5 from the Headless Bloodletting Beast boss. And you want only 1. So 1 radial heavy abyssal blood gem. And then you want 1 radial tempering gem from the Merciless Watchers in Thumeru, and 1 triangular tempering gem from the Merciless Watchers in East, just like the skill build. Now, Blood Tinge. Blood Tinge is another special stat in that it does not have any other native shape that's circular, like we just said. And so what you usually want to do is get 2 radial tempering gems from the Merciless Watchers in Tumeru again, and then 1 circular blood tinged gem. You get a circular blood-tinged gem from the non-boss merciless watchers with guns, in Hill or in East. You can find them guarding chests or guarding levers. So those are the watchers you want to farm, and they are mobs. Of course, you can try farming for out of shape blood tinge, but I do not recommend it. So the last stat we're talking about is Arcane. Arcane is the most varied of all the stats because aside from having, arcane attack for a weapon, you can also use Fire and Bolt. Fire and Bolt scale with Arcane. So, in most cases, for an arcane weapon, what you want is a lost weapon for the imprints because you have all three, and we'll see why you need all three. The first two gems that you want, Cold Abyssal gems, are the scaling gems for arcane. And in the case of arcane, usually two of them are the best because arcane scaling works differently than strength. So, two Cold Abyssal gems, one Radial from Thumeru Heil, and the boss that drops it is the Thumerian Elder on layers 3 and 4. The Thumerian Elder has the advantage of being in all the chalice types. It's in Thumeru, in Loran, and in Ys. So what you can do is farm one Radial from Thumeru Heil, one Waning Cold Abyssal gem from Loran and the Thumerian Elder, and then you get one triangular Fire, Bolt, or Arcane gem, depending on what you want, from the Merciless Watchers boss in Ys. We go back to the Watchers. Again.
Okay, so that about brings us to the end of our discussion on Blood Gems. I guess we covered pretty much everything you need to know in this Blood Gems 101 video. So, Altair, do you just want to tell people where they can find more information about Blood Gems and follow you if they want to just hear more from you?
Sure. So I wrote a written guide that is called Blood Gems 101, Understanding and Farming. You can find that in the description, and it pretty much recaps all that we've said in text if you need it for reference. And as for my social media, I'm not very active, but I do have a YouTube channel and a Twitch channel that I do use very occasionally. And if you want to follow me and see me stream some chalices or things like that, you can find those in the description.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Altair.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It was wonderful.
It was. So thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you all next time.